I've got a confession. I'm perplexed by Brandon Miller. Now, I'm one of the few people on this earth, seemingly, back in 2023, when it comes to the NBA community, that was touting Brandon Miller as the second best prospect in that draft. When everybody else was saying Scoot Henderson was miles and leagues above him, I advocated for the Charlotte Hornets to take Brandon Miller because I saw something in Brandon Miller that day that people are just seeing now. I saw a guy that was 6'9", could shoot the basketball effortlessly from beyond the three-point line, was nicer in the mid-range than people understood because the system that they ran at the University of Alabama, but also a guy that was much more athletic than people gave him credit for. But with all of that being said, today in this video, I gotta be real and ask the question, who is Brandon Miller? After a rookie season that showed so much promise, last season, watching him on the court, at times I gotta be honest, he left me perplexed in ways I can't begin to explain. Today in this video, we'll try to get to the bottom of who is the real Brandon Miller. Make sure you guys share this video, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. You're in the house of the mighty, mighty lit one. Brandon Miller, Antioch, Tennessee. I mean, where do I begin? 6'9", former point guard coming out of high school. All-world shooting guard at the University of Alabama. The darling of college basketball 2 years ago, before that critical incident happened. And there's no need to rejog the history of what happened because the family has dealt with enough and Brandon Miller has been exonerated of any charges. But it seems like that was the thing that really began to hinder his draft stock back in 2023. With all of that water under the bridge, he ended up in Charlotte ahead of Scoot Henderson. And as we can see, as they are now, I don't think that was even a conversation to begin with. So much for the so-called experts. But what I've seen out of Brandon Miller in Charlotte these first 2 years, there are times where I'm watching him and I'm saying to myself, yo, he might actually be the guy. No, I didn't stutter. Yes, on a team with LaMelo Ball, I was saying to myself at times, he might be the guy. The problem with Brandon Miller, though, as quick as that thought might come, the next game will happen and you start saying to yourself, is he a guy? That's what we're trying to get to the bottom of today in this video. I can tell you one thing. When you look at Brandon Miller on the surface, it's beautiful basketball. He puts you in the mind of a Paul George or shades of a T-Mac. Just that classic quintessential 6'9" and above wing player with a beautiful stroke from beyond the arc with smooth to silky handles and a nice 15-footer. When you look at him, he is the prototypical wing in the NBA. Too many times, though, we're left with questions. Is he Paul George or is he Allen Houston? And that's not a slight on either, but it just adds to the perplexity of what he can be. Now, if I'm being fair, when I was scouting him in that draft, the thing that jumped out to me was this guy seems like a guy that would be the perfect 1B on a team with a 1A. Or potentially, he would be the perfect 2 on a team with a 1. And I'm talking about pecking order, people. Pecking order is what used to rule the order of the day in the NBA. But I must say, with the OKC Thunder's recent championship success, there were many times in that series, especially the final series against the Indiana Pacers, where pecking order 1A and 1B flip-flop. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander would take a turn, and then Jay Williams would take a turn. And that 1-2 combination, even though I feel as though from top to bottom, the Indiana Pacers had a better built roster, that 1-2 combination was enough to win a championship. So imagine my hope for the Charlotte Hornets when I found out that they actually drafted someone to complement LaMelo Ball. The perfect 1B to his 1A. LaMelo Ball is said to be a pass-first point guard. I would argue he's more of a scorer. But with that being said, you would get excited as an NBA purist thinking about LaMelo leading a break and kicking it out ahead to Brandon Miller and him coming down with a ferocious open court dunk. Or if they're kicking the ball ahead with LaMelo and Brandon settles down on the wing, the endless possibilities that could come from that. And in these first 2 years of the Brandon experiment in Charlotte, we've seen some of that. The problem is we haven't seen enough of that. In his first 2 years in Charlotte, Brandon Miller is averaging 18 points a game, 17.5 his rookie season, 21 points his sophomore season. Although at times we did see strides in his sophomore season, there were too many times where LaMelo was not available or LaMelo was available, where you just left that game asking the question, who is Brandon Miller and where does he fit in the pecking order of a future playoff roster in Charlotte? I think the number one thing that Brandon Miller struggles with right now as a player is his inability to handle the ball in traffic. Now, some of this is a knock that was held on Brandon Miller before he came out of the University of Alabama. Some of this is just a detriment to his game because he may not be comfortable with doing it. But some of this I do have to put an onus on the Charlotte Hornets themselves. Are they putting Brandon Miller in the best position and the best scenario to be successful in the NBA? What do I mean by that? When Brandon Miller came out of University of Alabama, he was touted as a small forward with two-way potential. Since year one in Charlotte, for whatever reason, the Charlotte Hornets, with regime changes and all, have been set on playing him at the shooting guard. Now, to the unwatchful eye, that is a box score watcher, and I hope no one's that, you would say it's positionless basketball. What's the difference between a 2 and a 3 in today's game? Ah, my young Padawan, that's why you pulled up to the lit house. See, matchups are everything in the NBA. And it's a huge difference on a night-to-night basis being matched up with the most athletic tools in the game and being a bigger guy versus being matched up with a 3-and-D that's a small forward or a 4 that's undersized. Why does that matter? See, when you're a guy like Brandon Miller and you're 6'9", when you put the ball on the floor, if you're playing small athletic guys at the 2 position, of course they're going to want to nullify your height and your ability to get into the lane. So the only chance that they really have is to beat you to the spot and get up under your dribble. And when you're 6'9", if you're not comfortable with your handles, you're going to be a little uneasy when that happens. Too many times last year for Brandon Miller before he went down with injury, we saw Brandon Miller uncomfortable in situations where he was asked to initiate the offense or handle the ball against smaller defenders. This is something that I think lowers his scoring output and it takes down his aggression because he's afraid that if he puts the ball on the floor, one of those smaller defenders are going to reach and steal. Now, if he was playing at his natural position, yes, he is giving up something at the 3 when it comes to actual girth and size because he hasn't gotten to his grown man body. But night in and night out, he's not going to be playing those smaller defenders that are quicker, that if he goes to put the ball on the floor, are trying to get up under his dribble. Things that are handicaps for him at the 2 become strengths for him at the 3. This is what I say about the Charlotte Hornets not giving Brandon Miller an opportunity to establish the correct identity in this league. that wasn't the only thing that disturbed me when I watched Brandon Miller last year. Once again, as aforementioned, LaMelo Ball missed some games early on in the season after Brandon Miller came back. In those games where they played together, we saw flashes of brilliance, but at times we saw flashes of what is going on. So one would think that maybe the thing that was holding Brandon Miller back was the fact that LaMelo Ball was on the court, and his volume and his galaxy that he sucks in when he plays the game may be a lot for a young player like Brandon Miller to overcome. So you would think that Brandon Miller, once on the court alone, would begin to establish his own DNA. Remember that word from the last series that we had. His own DNA. But once again, too many times during the stretch of games that LaMelo was out, you were left asking the question, is this guy aggressive enough? Does he know how to find his own offense independently? Is it a situation where Brandon Miller will always need another top star in order to be his best self? But then there will be times, like I can remember, I think it was a Memphis game, where Brandon Miller looks lights out. It's just really hard to get a gauge on what and who Brandon Miller is. Now look, he's only going into his third season, and we all know that Kemet wasn't built in a day. So I'm hoping that in this season coming up, that Brandon Miller starts to assert his dominance on this team. You know what I've always said when it comes to LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller. Look, I love both of their games. I favor LaMelo's because that's just my style of play when it comes to an NBA connoisseur. But I can see the beautiful brilliance in Brandon Miller's game as well. So my outlook on the entire situation, and the Charlotte Hornets fan base should love this, is let the cream rise to the top. I don't think this competition for who's gonna be the guy on this team should be something that's fixed. I would like to see it happen natural on the court. And if LaMelo was to come on top, or Brandon Miller was to come out on top, whatever is best for the team should be what happens. But if Brandon Miller wants to establish himself in this league and become a face and an all-star and a potential all-NBA player and a potential MVP candidate, he has to start to establish his dominance on the court. That can be very hard to do for a young player playing with a big personality like LaMelo Ball in a franchise like Charlotte that's not necessarily known for winning. But the time on his young career is starting to get to the point with that first contract vastly approaching that the league is going to get a narrative out of him. And if he doesn't start to assert his dominance and who he really wants to represent himself as in the league, then the league is going to make up a narrative for him. Just look at how they already call LaMelo Ball a non-winning player. Even though the majority of the time in Charlotte, he's been playing with a bunch of guys that are no longer in the league, are investigated for gambling, or washed up vets 5 years before they got there. There will be no difference for Brandon Miller if they don't start winning in Charlotte. I'm hoping that these two young players, LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller, especially Brandon Miller because he's the topic, understand the importance of seizing the day and the opportunity now. Let the cream rise to the top. With training camp vastly approaching, I want to hear about the intensity level intensifying as these two grow together and compete together. Because now with this young lineup coming of Khan Kanempo and the rest of those young guys that were drafted, it's going to be important for these two guys, especially Brandon Miller, to begin to set the tone for his own career. But y'all let me know down there in the comment section below. Is Brandon Miller the most perplexing NBA player currently when it comes to potential as a star, or do you all feel like he's right on schedule? And if you've been liking all the content here in the Lit House, please Make sure you share the video, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. And think about becoming a channel member, because once the season starts for all 82 games, we'll be covering all the teams in the NBA. But you're gonna have to be a part of the membership role of the YouTube Lit House to get involved with all the perks we got going on. Well, please, y'all get interactive. Let me know what y'all think of Brandon Miller down there in the comment section below. Is he more Allen Houston, or is he more Paul George? I don't know. I guess the last take's up to you.